About 3 years ago, some very interesting information started to become available, and encouragingly from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, which is a government policy institute that does this kind of research. And they showed that the rest of our life can typically be looked at in 3 stages. Now, the simple names for those stages are when you're able, how long you're able. The next bit is when you're less able. And the final bit is when you're dependent. I'll come to dependency later as a special item because it's important. But at age 65, a typical 65-year-old, male or female, has about a life expectancy of, let's use a round figure, of about 20 years. Women a bit longer, men slightly less. About half that typically will be able. About another 6 or 7 years will be less able, and then there'll be a period of dependency, about at age 65. For women on average, about 5 years, for men a bit over 3 years. So for the first time, we've got a sense of how things may play out. Now remember, these are averages, so they're not necessarily you or me, but it's a pretty useful rule of thumb to go by. And when you think about your own circumstances and how you are, you'll get a sense of whether you have likely to be more able or less able for a period of time. But it gives you a good mental approach that for at least half of the rest of your life, you're likely to be in pretty good shape. So questions like, should I retire at 65? You start to get into focus, because if at 65, the typical person has about 10 years where they're pretty functional, does that 65 mean anything, or does it really rely on how you feel about what you want to do, which is important. So it's an important part of decision making, is understanding what the context of the decision is. And that's what we're trying to do. So the interesting thing is that as you get older, it doesn't work out quite as you might expect. At 65, the average person, male and female altogether, lives to about 86. But if you get to 75, you've added another couple of years to that. And what's more, the stages have changed a bit too. So what happens is you get more able and less able life as you get older, and your dependency tends to be shorter. Now that's really interesting. So if you aim to be as healthy as you can and your life expectancy increases, it's not all bad, it tends to be more good, and the dependent period gets shorter. So that's a pretty big boost for having a crack at living well, isn't it? Because the interesting thing is, when you look at the shape analyzer and all the questions we ask, they're as much about living well as they are about living longer. Living longer is a useful number to work with, but what most people want is to live as well as they can for as long as they reasonably can. So the information we're providing, we think, helps people to be properly informed. And that's our mission.